Today, we are excited to welcome Haley Miller and Laura Derbonne, who are the co-presidents of the National Disabled Law Students Association, to talk about accommodations and advocating for yourself. So thank you both for taking time out of your very busy law student schedules to chat with me today and have this very important conversation. Before we get things kicked off, can you both introduce yourselves and share a little bit more about your own law school journey and what got you involved with the National Disabled Law Students Association? Laura, do you want to go first?
So I'm Laura. I'm a 2L at Tulane Law School. And I really got interested in disability work. I didn't know I wanted to go to law school, but I knew I wanted to do something in the advocacy realm. When my junior year of college, I was diagnosed as autistic. And ultimately, my law school career, I say all the time in a joking fashion for the most part, but that it arose out of spite. I wanted to make a difference. And I felt that law was the way to go with that. But I was told by so many people, whether that be academic counselors, friends, family, that it might be too rigorous of a field. And maybe you should consider something else. Maybe you should look into legal assistant work. And I think hearing all of that just really motivated me to no, I'm going to go, I'm going to do it. And once I got into law school, I realized that there was not that kind of community that I was looking for at Tulane, but I saw that there was a spot for it. I learned about NDLSA. A group of us at Tulane founded our local organization affiliate of NDLSA. And then I came across the national work, and it's been great ever since.
My name is Haley Miller. I'm a 3L at Seattle University School of Law. I actually wanted to go to law school starting in 2013, which is when I graduated from undergraduate. I didn't know what type of law I wanted to practice, but as I became more involved in the law school community, I realized that there is a huge need for more advocacy on behalf of students with disabilities. I didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so I did a quick Google search for organizations that work with students with disabilities, and I ran across the National Disabled Law Students Association. So like Laura, I also started a member organization at my school my first year, and then this year I got involved in the national organization as well.
Thank you so much. So I'm hoping that you can share a bit more with our listeners about the history of NDLSA. I don't believe the organization is all that old. I think it's a fairly young organization. And how does it relate to organizations that might exist on individual campuses versus this national association?
The NDLSA is a national nonprofit incorporated in New York. I believe we incorporated in July 2020, so at the height of the pandemic. And we have over 60 member organizations at different law schools across the country. And I think that represents 25 different states where we have a presence. And we're also working actively to recruit other disability student organizations at schools, get them to come into the NDLSA umbrella.
And so if you have a organization that maybe they're not necessarily chapters, right? I guess I'm trying to see how it all fits together.
Yeah, they're not chapter organizations in that they're not legally affiliated with the nonprofit that's been incorporated in New York, but they do receive benefits in the form of support from us. We have member org funding requests available to our member organizations. We also do a lot of individual and group advocacy. So it's not quite a chapter, but we do have affiliate or member organizations.
Well, one of the things I thought we could think about in our conversation today is talking about students who are at different points in their legal education journey and where they might have situations come up that they either might need the support of one of these either school-based organizations or the national organization. So we're recording this in the springtime, and someone listening to this may be planning to start law school in the fall. And if they are planning to start law school in the fall and they know that they are going to need to advocate for themselves at law school to get access to accommodations, what should they start thinking about now, laying the groundwork, or at the beginning of their 1L year to set themselves up for the most success? What I have seen in the past is sometimes students wait too long to advocate for themselves. They wait until you're getting a little too close to exams, and then the stress and the time pressure and the bureaucracy can get so frustrating. So, how do you feel like new 1Ls can start to set themselves up for the best situation in a difficult process?
People that maybe have had accommodations in the past, people that are familiar with a system like this, don't necessarily anticipate with getting to law school that a lot of schools have requirements. The ADHD diagnosis you received in elementary school does not hold up to the law school admin. So, considering the possibility that you might need to be reevaluated, go through that whole process, which is expensive both in money and time, is something that I see where a lot of people get held back. Yes, by all means, they need and deserve accommodations, but a lot of schools do have requirements in place for how, I don't want to say outdated, but outdated information can be that you submit.
Will most students communicate with you before you actually start your law school career? So let's say you're an admitted student, you've paid your deposit, you know that this is something you're going to need to work on. Do you think potential students can contact disability services and get some of those questions answered? Because I would think if you need to go through another evaluation situation and you may have moved, you may not need new providers, you have new health insurance, there are so many things that can play in. I think that summer before school might be a good time to try and invest in that if you can, to not distract you in those early parts of your 1L year.
Definitely. I know in my personal experience, I started the accommodations process in May before I started law school. So, 3 months prior to even stepping into a classroom, I contacted my university's disability services, and they did have what Laura was referring to, a currency requirement that all documentation be within the past 3 years. I think that's pretty standard. But my law school advised me at the time that my documentation might not be sufficient for the bar exam. So even though it was enough to get me accommodations in law school, I might have to get reevaluated for the MPRE or the bar exam. I actually did this spring and it was disruptive. It took a long time and it was very expensive. So it's something that you should definitely have on your roadmap early on. And I think if you can get that advice from disability services about whether or not your documentation is sufficient, that's super helpful to know going into law school.
That is great to hear. I often hear from bar takers that their law schools don't talk to them about that at all. So I love that your law school warned you about that. I think it can be such a surprise for some students, especially around diagnoses such as ADHD or anxiety, that the standards that their law schools use to give accommodations could be very different from the NCBE, which does the MPRE, and then the individual states, which can have their own individual requirements, even in the UBE, where the different states may be giving the same test, but individual states are going to give you those accommodations, and that's going to be up to them. So you do need to think about that or ask questions about that early on to make sure that you're laying the groundwork for those accommodations for the bar, which make a huge difference for bar takers. What do you think are some of the common mistakes that law students make when they start talking to their schools? Waiting too late is one that we just mentioned, but trying to set themselves up for success. We talked about doing it early, but let's say you arrive to school in September, you haven't engaged with the school about this. What are some of the common missteps you think that happen?
I think just for whatever reason, self-selecting out of accommodations. I know a lot of people who fully believe that they need them and would benefit greatly from them, but because of either the culture around them, which is a whole other thing to get into, or just the time and effort and money it can take, just end up thinking, I can do it anyway. I can take the test under the normal time conditions. I don't need a note taker, whatever the situation may be. And then not having those classroom and exam accommodations really becomes a hindrance when trying to get NPRE accommodations, which when you don't get those because you didn't have classroom accommodations, you don't get bar accommodations because you didn't have NPRE accommodations. So I think it's easy to kind of get caught up in the bureaucratic process in the moment and not have that perspective of how much even just waiting a semester can impact you farther down the line.
That makes a lot of sense. It is a long game. You have to play a long game with law school because you're ending up at the bar. So, really seeing it as a long game. And I know in my experience, I've spoken with students who I believe would have been granted accommodations if they had applied for them, but they felt that it was cheating, or they felt that they had some really complicated feelings underneath these accommodations that for some reason they would be outed. The bar would know or wouldn't give them bar admission because of something like this. I assume that in the school communities that you both are part of, and then an association like NDLSA, who is becoming a resource for advocacy, how do you think we help students feel confident in accessing what is not a benefit? It's not like you're cheating. It is leveling the playing field so you can be the best possible exam taker you can be in the moment, which is all that we want for students, is to be able to compete on a level playing field and be able to perform their best. But that seems to be a really hard message for some students to internalize. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think that students can do if that sounds familiar to somebody who's listening?
For me and the culture at my school, at least, which I know it's going to be different for everyone, but that definitely is pervasive, I would say, of people thinking that double time is an unfair advantage, that students with accommodations should be graded on a different curve. I feel like I've heard it all when it comes to that. And there is the fine line of needing to maintain some of that level of it being anonymous so you don't risk blind grading issues with professors, like learning who has what accommodations coming out when it comes to the exam time. But for us, I think that we're tackling that mostly just through visibility. I mean, I talk about my accommodations. I don't try to scurry to my little small exam room. They see that I'm not in the room with them taking the exam. So it's being open about that. It's hosting information sessions with our accessibility center and our director of academic success, who is our law school coordinator for accommodations, where we're open and we talk about the kinds of accommodations that are available. So it's not just guesswork for students. And we talk about what the process looks like. So just being as open with it as possible is the way that we combat people feeling like they need to hide.
I think it's important to highlight that there are multiple studies showing that students who have disabilities benefit from additional time on testing, but students without disabilities don't actually benefit from additional time. I'm doing an independent study on this in my school this semester, and so I might have more information to share at a later date. But on our campus, I think it's the same. We have done a lot of work around normalizing accommodations. So we actually introduce them at orientation. We facilitate a panel with 3 students who receive accommodations, and they just talk to the incoming 1Ls about what that process looks like and what their journey has been like. And then we also encourage all the faculty to include accommodations information within their syllabi. So, yeah, that's been super helpful just in getting the word out. And we also have periodic presentations from our disability services office about the different accommodations processes for the law school versus the NPRE versus the bar exam. Lastly, I would just say like getting plugged into the community, like getting plugged in with other students with disabilities or other students who receive accommodations can be super helpful because then you don't feel like you're the only one in your friend group who receives what might be perceived as an unfair benefit or advantage. And instead, you can share camaraderie with other students who are similarly situated in that they also receive accommodations through the law school.
Yeah, I think it's great that both of your campuses do have like very visible discussions about this, even if there's still stigma associated with it.
I feel like it's also important, and something I try to do is because I think I'm in a position of visibility. With my disability, I open about accommodations, talking about them. People do come to me with their concerns about them as well. And reframing that conversation about, like, well, who is your problem with? People are angry at students with accommodations instead of the extremely poorly structured system that necessitates them to begin with for so many students. So reframing it as you're mad at the student who has double time for the exam instead of the professor who made the exam unfinishable under regular circumstances, or the concept of even grading a student's entire semester on one test to begin with and having that test essentially determine the scope of your employment. So reminding people that it's the system that is wrong, that is pitting us against each other, that's making you feel like we should be graded on a different curve. It's not the students.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Years ago, I had an interview with a psychologist who supports students who apply for accommodations to the bar. And he was really the person who introduced to me this idea of leveling the playing field, as I said, that what we're not doing is giving anyone a benefit. If we're going to tell people they have to compete against each other, then we have to compete on a level playing field. And after the years of doing the work that I have been doing and speaking with students, many of whom have a variety of learning differences or attention deficit issues or even medical issues that change this law school experience, it is very clear to me now what it means to level the playing fields. And what we're asking people to do in tests can be very different than what we ask them to do in work. And that the ability to write a paper or do an independent study, there are all sorts of ways that you can accommodate yourself when you have a lot of control, but it's different in a testing environment. And I wanted to share that not because I think I need to educate you all, because you all are experts in your space, but for our listeners, to me personally, when I really started to learn more about this and see the effect it had on different students, that was a big deal to me to start to see it in this way. And now I've seen it play out for students. And what I've seen with something like extended time is that it's not always just about writing for longer. I have had students who get time and a half or double time, but they need that to maybe they have a physical medical need that means that they need to get up and walk around. They can't sit for the whole entire time. Or they may have such attention issues that they need to do a mindfulness meditation during the exam to clear their head to be able to keep functioning. Or they need to be able to drink water in the room, and you can't have water in certain bar exam situations for sure. That's a common accommodation. Or you're pregnant and you need to be next to a bathroom because you need to be able to access the restroom and not walk for 5 minutes. There are so many things that allow us to perform at our best. And for me, when we really start saying, like, how do we all perform at our best? And then we can compete against each other. But the fairness is really just all performing at our best. It's not that someone's best with accommodations is just by default going to be better than mine if I do not need accommodations. That's just not how it works. And I think that I've learned so much from my own students over time that I feel like sometimes we're having the wrong conversation about this being like cheating or a benefit. It's what's necessary to play the game as we have laid out the game, as you said, right? Be angry about the test, not about what we need to do to make the testing fair.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if a law student gets diagnosed with something in law school, which I think ADHD is something that I commonly hear is a diagnosis that comes up in law school due to the pressure cooker nature of the law school experience, that it really brings to light things that people could just do self-accommodations for in previous parts of their life. Haley, do you have any thoughts about what a student should do if they, either get a new diagnosis or they're really starting to get an inkling that something is not feeling quite right about how they're performing in school. Maybe they've gotten some negative feedback. Maybe a professor has made a suggestion to them that something could be going on. Where does a student start if this is a totally new world to them? It's not that their documentation is out of date. They got nothing. They're really starting at square one and they're in the academic system already.
Yeah, so that kind of applies to me. I was just diagnosed with ADHD last month at age 32, and I didn't previously have any documentation showing accommodations in K through 12 or on the LSAT. Basically, law school was the first time that I received accommodations, and I received them for something different than ADHD. But yes, you're right. That's a common diagnosis, especially I think with the age group that's entering law school. A lot of mood disorders and other issues surface when you're in your mid 20s. And so I find it very normal that we're seeing a lot of students get diagnosed for the first time in this environment. I think it's important, again, to get plugged into a community with other students who have accommodations. Also, really keeping track of who your resources are and keeping track of your medical providers and also like anyone who might be able to assist you with getting the documentation you need for testing scenarios. It's interesting that this issue around disability identity comes up during law school, but I think finding others who've navigated this journey is really important in order to feel heard and seen.
The LSAT was the first time that I received accommodations, and my original law school accommodations were based on chronic illness, nothing to do with patient and time, any of the more, I guess, academic focused parts of accommodations. It was definitely a hard thing to navigate when, even if a school might not accept it, someone has their ADHD report from when they were 8, trying to find providers. One of the struggles for me when I was seeking my autism diagnosis was finding someone that would even see me, being either over 18 or over 21 in certain circumstances. It was as if autism stopped existing when people become adults. So I think that kind of goes back to getting started early. I definitely suggest admitted students reach out if there is a DALSA chapter at the school that they're considering, connect with people that are open and are willing to talk. If there's someone that you can connect with that has similar disabilities to you, has accommodations that you think you need, make those connections early, get started on it early. And I think that Haley raised a great point of also making sure you know what providers you're using. One of my original diagnoses was from a nurse practitioner, and I didn't find out until I got into law school that I needed an actual medical doctor for one of my diagnoses to be considered. So again, can't say it enough. I think that all goes back to getting started early with things and really plugging into that community.
And I would add to that, let's say you're a 1L and you start to get some very specific feedback from professors, because some professors that I know will sit down and say, have you ever had an attention deficit issue before? Because I'm seeing something in your work, and maybe if not, it's something you want to look into. We are lawyers, we don't diagnose anybody. But if you look at a lot of student work, sometimes you can see where someone might be struggling. And I think that it's important as a student to have open ears to that, even though it might be really hard to hear. Because if that comes up in that first semester, as you were saying, it takes time to lay the groundwork. It takes time to find your providers. And you also want the documents for the bar exam if you can. So I think there has to be a bit of an openness to it. As you said, Haley, mood disorders and a lot of stuff gets diagnosed in your 20s or into your early 30s. And an openness around that to say, if this is happening, I want to engage with my medical professionals and make sure that I get access to what I need and not wait if you're starting to get those little hints or suggestions. And that's hard to do because law school's super overwhelming. And so you have so much to do. And it seems like the norm that law students should be struggling, right? It's like, oh, well, you should be overwhelmed or you should be struggling with exams. There's this narrative that it should be so hard. So it can be hard for an individual to say, well, is it normal hard or is something else happening here, whatever normal means? But is there something else that's making this a more extreme version of difficult? And is that something that can be handled through various different paths? And then I think it does open the doorway to success because, as you said, Laura, it has broken my heart over the years to hear very smart, thoughtful, motivated law students who I think the legal profession needs being coached out of the legal profession because of learning differences or disabilities. That does not serve the profession. We need good lawyers, and good lawyers also means that we need representation of people who think in a creative number of ways and who interact with the world in different ways. And so I do hope that dialogues, just like we're having here, the dialogues that are facilitated by this organization, and as the reach gets bigger, we can realize that there's a place in the legal profession for all of us. The job of the schools and the bar, which it does not so well sometimes, is to get us there so we can do the good work that needs to be done. So, Laura, you're a 2L. Haley, you're a 3L. So you're getting ready, right? Haley, you're a 3L. I remember that correctly, right?
Yes.
Okay. So you
Yeah.
are just ready for graduation. I love it. What advice would you have given your 1L self or your 0L self if you could go back and talk about how to make this part of your law school experience better or at least less stressful than perhaps it has been?
So I had a lot of difficulty transitioning from working for 9 years to going back to school. I also am a first generation law student. I don't know anyone in my family who's ever been an attorney. So I wish I had been more receptive to feedback, which I think is what you're getting at with openness to learning about whether maybe there's some sort of disability or something that's impacting your ability to perform. I wish I had paid better attention to my professor's feedback and modified accordingly. I also was one of those students who thought I could do it without accommodation. Even though I contacted the Disability Services office far in advance, I didn't ask for testing accommodations or testing time because I thought I had always been successful in school beforehand. And so why wouldn't I be in law school? It was definitely a process of acceptance and, yeah, being receptive to feedback from others that helped me get to a place where I realized how important the accommodations were. I wish I maybe had done a little more prep before I started law school. I didn't take a lot of feedback from people that I knew in my life that were lawyers. They all told me that it was very hard and they discouraged me from pursuing law school. I just blocked out all that noise and thought I'll just charge ahead and forge my own path. I wish I had maybe known some people who enjoyed their law school experience or had maximized it so that I could have taken some tips from them. So I think it's important to like go in with the mindset that yes, this is challenging for everyone, but you can do it. And there are resources like accommodations that you can put in place to help you be successful.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your own journey. I'm sure that's going to mean a lot to somebody listening to this. So thank you for that. All right. So, Laura, what about you? Any lessons? I know you're not that far away from your 1L self. We age quickly in wisdom through our law school years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what would you tell your
Mhm.
1L self?
Yeah. So I'm similarly situated as Haley. I'm the first person in my family to go to law school. So I had no idea what I was getting into. I was admitted relatively late in the cycle. So I didn't go to the admitted students days to connect with people. I really went in blind. And I even consider myself someone that got started on this whole process pretty early. I took one practice midterm, wasn't graded just to gauge where you were. And I realized I can't do this the way I was anticipating. I think some of that fight that I was talking about earlier made me, again, similarly to Haley, think I can do this without accommodations. I can do this the normal way that everyone else is. And then I took that test and I realized maybe I can't, and that's okay. And that's very early compared to a lot of people I know that still got their accommodations in time for finals. They were fine. But even then, I wish that I had more time, particularly for my next point, which is that I wish I had advocated for myself more. I think that if I had longer, I could have done that. There are still accommodations that I applied for that I was denied. Burnout, not having the time has made me not pursue. I was told I was pursuing things that were too severe for my personal diagnoses, discouraged from applying for some, again, more intense accommodations. And I think that the earlier that I had gotten started in the process, I probably could have tried harder to truly find the right accommodation for me, because there have been accommodations that I've received and I've realized, oh, actually, I don't think I need this. And that's totally fine too. I know so many other people that are in a similar situation to that, whether it be with extra time, whether it be with note taking, just a myriad of things. But having the time to figure out what works for you is so important. So I think definitely starting earlier to have more time to appeal denials, to go in and talk to people and fight for yourself and be an advocate is so important. And I would recommend that to everyone, first and foremost.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing your personal journey, but also I think the fact that you do sometimes have to appeal. It's something I've seen many times. And you may need to get external support, whether it be from your organization. Oftentimes, students come to us in our private capacity because they want to talk about how to manage their accommodations. You need to find someone to help guide you. We are not able to file those accommodations for you, but we can talk about how to best utilize your time and a half, how to make it match what you need. And I think so often it's hard to say, okay, well, now I have the accommodations. Now, how do I maximize them so I can perform my best? And that can be a difficult question. And so I think openness with other students, hearing other people's stories, working with your support on campus, getting external support if you need it, that's going to give you the best opportunity to perform at your best, which is really what we're looking for. I also want to plug something that has been mentioned a few times about note taking, that if you're a new incoming law student, you may not know that other law students in the class oftentimes get asked to be a note taker. And sometimes you give your notes to disability services. Sometimes you give them directly to a student. I was a note taker and I loved the fact that I could do that and provide something to a student so that they could be more successful. And so I think that if you are approached to do something like that, it's important for students to be open to that as well. That is part of being a good member of a community. And as competitive as we make these law school experiences out to be, it is still a community where we want to collectively be successful, even as we are pitted against each other. And so I think saying yes when you are asked to do things like note taking is an important piece of being part of that community and supporting your friends and future colleagues so that they can have the opportunity to perform just as you have the opportunity to perform. So I think that's an important plug because often we don't talk about that's an important role that somebody should do. And you need to have another law student do it. And it makes your own note taking much better if you're going to have to send it to someone else. It really upped my own note taking game. If I knew that someone else was going to read my notes, I really wanted them to be solid and helpful to them. And then you would get the added benefit that you have these beautiful notes that are going to be very helpful for you. Well, as we are running out of time, if someone is listening to this and is saying, these are my people, I need the support, I need to interact with this community, I want to get involved in NDLSA, how do students find out more about the national organization, their local law school organizations? What should they do?
Yeah, so they can check out our website, which is www.ndlsa.org. We also have a Facebook page for NDLSA, but we also have a Facebook group called the Law School Disability Advocacy Coalition. Also, we have a sister organization for legal professionals as well. So the assistance doesn't stop when you stop being a law student. There are still folks out there who would be very willing to connect with you about any of your accommodations needs, like in the workplace or whatever it is. We also have an Instagram So do a lot of our member organizations at individual schools. A lot of them tend to repost our content so you can get plugged in a variety of different ways.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I will just also say that we keep a continuously updated list of our member organizations on our website. So you can see if your school does have an organization. And if it doesn't, Haley and I both started the organizations at our respective schools, and we love to help people found more of them. So please reach out to us if that's something that you're listening to this and it sounds like you might want to get involved with.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, Haley, I have to ask that you come back to the podcast to talk to me about your independent study and all your research when you're done. I love some good data. So I would love to dig into some of your research and data around accommodations.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for your time, for the work that you're doing, and for creating community for law students around this issue.
Thank you for having us.
If you enjoyed this video, please take a second to give us a like and leave a comment. And be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any future content. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us via the contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for watching.